In case you can't tell, I'm vamping to see if they still are in that position. They are. They're a half game ahead of the Padres. Excellent. Greetings and welcome to Hot Takedown, the show where the hot takes of the sports world meet the numbers that prove them right or tear them down. Today is May 18th, 2021. I am not your usual host, Sarah Ziegler. She is out on vacation. I am Neil Payne. I'm a senior sports writer for 538, and I am joined by the other usual member of our panel, Jeff Foster from Los Angeles, 538 contributor. How you doing, Jeff?
How you doing, not Sarah Ziegler?
I know. You can call me Not Sarah all episode.
Me, other regular, is doing pretty well over here.
Yeah, well, we've long dreamed of just the two of us being able to talk hockey and various other sports that are important only to us, unencumbered by the snide comments of people that don't like those sports. So this is really the dream playing out right now, right?
Maybe a little F1, some horse racing.
Yeah. We have a horse update on Mr. Bob Baffert, who apologized, but also was banned from the Belmont. Is that right?
Yeah, it was. And you know what? I'm a cynic. And this is a great sport to be a cynic about because New York Racing Association bans him from the Belmont 2 days after his horse doesn't win the Preakness, meaning there's no chance for a triple crown.
No triple crown, yeah.
Which,
right.
If you follow the Belmont Stakes, they watch the Preakness and have always watched the Preakness, except for last year when they ran them out of order. They have more at stake than anyone else in that race because the Belmont's popularity when you have a horse going for a triple crown versus when it's just a race. It's basically the Travers in Saratoga. It's an expensive race with none of this history at stake. It's a huge decline. I mean, they go from like having 100,000 people there in a normal year to a fraction of that. So they announced that conveniently after he's out. So call me a cynic. It does seem like the right move, but this moral high ground they're taking on, caring about the horse's health above everything else. I'm a little cynical about. It's horse racing. Let's talk about it again in May 2022.
Yeah,
unless the Breeders is really interesting.
Well, you tell us if that's the case.
We don't. We can skip it.
We've got a packed show with sports that are all major, in my opinion. We're going to talk about how the first round of the NHL playoffs are shaping up, at least on the American side. We have not yet seen the Canadian teams in action. That'll happen soon enough. Patience for everyone. Then we'll turn our attention to the NBA playoffs and have a special guest join us to preview the basketball postseason, including the play-in tournament, which starts tonight. And then finally, we'll have a deep dive into data with our rabbit hole of the week, and it's a baseball rabbit hole. Look at that. We're covering almost all of the major pro men's sports leagues. The NHL playoffs have begun, like we said, mostly, sorry about the delay, Canada, but round one series are going on in the other three divisions, and the North will join the fun on Thursday, finally. Thank God we can finally finish these meaningless Vancouver versus Calgary games that we have to get out of the way before they start. So today we're going to take a look at how the American teams are doing, if any upsets are on the horizon, and our take for the week comes from the Puck Soup podcast, where Greg Wyshynski and Ryan Lambert chatted about one of the closer matchups in the first round, the Washington Capitals and the Boston Bruins. But then this was before the series started. They seemed pretty sure what was going to happen in this series. Let's listen.
I don't know, man. The Capitals' goaltending has been dog shit for like the last month and a half.
Yeah, and like they're just not. We've been saying it for a couple of years now. It's like, you know what? They keep having good regular seasons, but they're just not that good of a team. Like, you just look at their whole roster and you go, I mean, I guess. All those guys are like 50
stuff is just
now?
really strange. I can't endorse a team with all this swirl of weirdness around it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Bruins are just like fucking rock stars again.
The Bruins are like, oh, we just win every game 4-1. That's fine.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we're just like winning to the puck line every single night now.
So, yeah, obviously that was before the Caps won Game 1 in overtime, although the Bruins did return the favor in Game 2. So, Jeff, right now this series is 1-1, and I kind of feel what they're saying about Washington, especially now that they're down to 39-year-old goalie Craig Anderson holding down the fort, yet also they're right in it. I don't know. What do you think? Is it realistic to think Anderson can kind of keep doing this and denying the Bruins, or do you think the Bruins are kind of still clear favorites here?
Before the goalie situation unfolded, I would have called this pretty much a toss-up. I know the Caps are old, but this is a team with a window that's probably closing, and I think they probably realize this is their last best shot to repeat as Cup winners, and I don't think they're an easy out. I mean, like, there's tons of playoff experience up and down the roster, and we've seen that's a legit thing when we get to this part of the calendar. But with Anderson and net, who played well. I mean,
played well.
Like,
yeah,
credit to him. He's 39, but that, we've seen also how important goaltending is, and not like their other options were that great. But it is a strange situation what's going on with Samsonov. I don't really understand it. I mean, the guy's in COVID protocol for the second time, and Kuznetsov is right with him. There's clearly an internal feud going on. And even, Caps fans I talk to don't really quite understand the status of those guys. So it does seem like for now. I mean, Samsonov hasn't played since, I think, the 1st of May. It looks like Craig Anderson's going to be the guy, which I would think would tilt the scales to Boston. But I think this whole little pod in the East is really competitive. I don't think there's that much difference between all 4 of those teams, counting the Islanders and the Penguins. So I'm not ready to make a prediction that Boston's definitely going to win, because it would not shock me. I mean, look, both games went to overtime. So I think it's going to be a battle. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, even, normally in other sports we've seen, like if your quarterback or your top 2 quarterbacks go down and you have to bring in kind of a 39-year-old who perhaps has not been a significant contributor in a number of years, you're screwed, like in a playoff game, like if that happens. But hockey is so weird, especially when it comes to goalies who are simultaneously the most important position in a certain sense. We've seen goalies that play really well be the big difference between a team making a deep run in the Stanley Cup and not. Yet at the same time, it just seems impossible to predict who will actually be that goalie and play that well. And so in any other sport, you'd say the equivalent of Craig Anderson is like a major liability. But here it's like, I don't know. They could win just as easily with him as maybe with the other guys, because it's not like their other options were amazing during the season either. Goaltending has been kind of an issue for them all year, like since they'd planned Henrik Lundqvist to come in and sort of be their guy, or at least give it a shot, and then he had to miss the whole season with that heart condition. So they've been kind of plugging holes back there all season long. This is no different.
And Craig Anderson has been here before. I mean, it was not that long ago. He was the Ottawa's goalie when they went to the conference finals. He played 19 games in that playoffs. I think it was 2017, and they went 7 with the Penguins.
I think they came within a game of going to the Cup
finals.
Finals.
I mean, he was so he's been there. There's plenty of reason to think he'd be just as good as those other 2.
Yeah.
Perhaps with more experience.
Yeah, and the experience factor is interesting in hockey, where it does seem to be that there is an element to that. We've seen that also in the NBA. Of course, like playoff experience, our testing has kind of shown that is significant boost to a team, but I wouldn't be surprised if the same thing was true in hockey, just because like we've seen certain guys, especially and maybe it's not so much goalies, but just having guys that have been there before do seem to kind of pop up again and again. I think of Justin Williams, who went to the Stanley Cup final, it seemed like every few years with the Kings, with the Hurricanes, so on and so forth, and just having people like that in your locker room does seem to be an advantage. Now, let's talk about the other matchups that seem to be pretty close, or perhaps deceptively close. I'm thinking in some ways about the Golden Knights and the Wild, which was like the Knights looked like one of the 2 best teams in the league going into the playoffs. Now, boom, they get shut out. They lose the opening game against the Wild, and the Wild are a team that gave them trouble all regular season long. They actually beat them in the season series. So are the Knights legitimately, in trouble? Should they be worried, or is that just like a one-game hiccup for them to start a series off?
No, I don't. I think they're. Look, I would have said this before this series, that this is a tough matchup. This Wild team is really interesting, and it would not shock me at all if they won this series. I mean, if Cam Talbot keeps playing the way he did the other night, they certainly will win this series. But with Kirill Kaprizov is really, like, we talked about him on our hockey chat.
Kirill the Thrill.
Kirill the Thrill, the soon-to-be Calder Trophy-winning 25-year-old rookie who's
23. He's 23. I know you've got an issue with these KHL veterans.
The NHL rookie / seasoned veteran of the KHL, who gold medal winning for Russia, and think how long ago the Winter Olympics were. Rookie star breakout for the Wild, and just the whole team is tough, and it's not a good matchup. We saw this in the regular season. The Knights always seem to struggle against the Wild. So, I still believe in the Wild. I really like their team, especially the way Fleury has played this year. And even having Robin Lehner as the world's best playoff backup currently gives them so many options in net. And I'm not ready to rule them out. But yeah, I think the Wild could win this one.
It would be a real shame, if the Knights got knocked out. I mean, someone had to finish second in that division, and the Knights were number one until the Avalanche caught them, I think, on the last day of the season. They beat them out on a tiebreaker. And so for the Avalanche, you get a chance to face the Blues, who seem terribly overmatched, and that series probably will be a sweep, barring something interesting happening.
I think so. I mean, especially with David Perron, their leading scorers out with COVID, which is like, come on, how?
What timing?
I'm still surprised guys are still getting COVID, but put that aside. It is not going to help them. And they already were kind of overmatched, I think, against the Avalanche, who have everyone back. We saw Nathan McKinnon back. Grubauer also missed some time and has not been fully healthy. They have had a lot of injuries, but it does seem like now all the pieces are in place for the Avalanche, the Presidents. But then again, we've seen how well President's Trophy teams have done in the past. So,
but I do think getting it, this year was key, just because it meant the seeding and being able to avoid the Wild. Because I think you could argue that the Avalanche and the Knights are the two best teams in the league. But right now, already the Knights are sort of not, I don't think they're in horrible trouble, but definitely, in a hole to start that series. But we'll have to see how that plays out. I do want to talk about just the big picture, the Battle of Florida, which was amazing, and Tampa Bay rallied, absorbed all of Florida's punches, and then ended up winning. But that seems like that series is going to be just a real knockdown, drag-out fight the entire time. And the Bolts, any concerns that, Nikita Kucherov coming back, maybe he's not, he'll take a little while to warm up. No, he looked
he's fine.
Instantly just as good.
He's one of the best players in the league. Instantly.
Yeah, it turns out, he is not rusty after missing the entire regular season. So they look strong. I mean, the Avalanche, again, dominated Game 1. So right now our model has the Avs with a 20% chance to win the Cup, followed by Tampa Bay at 13%, then Carolina, who also showed up really well in Game 1 of their series, at 10%, and the Golden Knights at 9% despite trailing. Do you think that's about right? And those are sort of the teams to keep an eye on as we go through this, or any other teams that you would throw into the mix? Obviously, I'm horribly disrespecting Toronto. They're the next team in the ranking there. Should they emerge from the North?
Yeah, I think it's about right. I don't want to rule out the Avalanche just because of what they have, at least on paper. But I mean, Carolina to me is probably my pick right now to win the Cup.
Oh, to win the Cup.
Yeah, I mean, well, at least to make the finals. I don't know. I mean, it's really hard to tell.
We're not talking about making the finals. We're talking about winning the Cup here, Jeff.
It's really hard to tell because we can't really predict, unless we really map it out erroneously, who they're going to be playing and what would be the conference finals. But I certainly like them in the Central because I think Nashville. I think they're going to make quick work of Nashville, and then I think that Florida Tampa. I think the model might be a little high on Tampa, to be honest, just because I think the Panthers are tough, and I think that is going to be. I think we're going to have a whole series of what we saw the other night, and I think Carolina might be just sitting back, winning in 5 or something kind of easy on Nashville as we saw the other night. And then going to be playing a banged up, exhausted team in the next round. So I like them to emerge from the Central. And then I think the North, obviously Toronto, but why not Edmonton? I mean, we've talked about McDavid. We know what they're capable of if they can get some goaltending, for Mike Smith, which normally wouldn't be a sentence that bodes well, but
hey, in a Craig Anderson world, Mike Smith, I mean, you got all these guys that teams. I don't know how this compares historically, but it does seem like a lot of teams are kind of searching for their solutions, trying to kind of feel things out at goaltender early in the playoffs, and maybe things are a little bit less settled than for more teams than usual. Just because it does feel like there are a lot of teams that we don't necessarily know who their answer is going to be, and it's going to kind of have to work itself out.
Yeah, I mean the Panthers for one,
right?
Have two
Bobrovsky was not amazing. I mean, he gave up 5 goals in
and they
that
have
game.
They have the kid Hobie Baker winning Spencer Knight, and then they also have Chris
Dreger.
Dreger, who's
however
been
it's
good.
pronounced. Yeah, he's been
Apologies
good.
for his pronunciation of his last name. But so they have other options. It'd be interesting to see if they switch it up.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some. But Toronto, that's part of the problem. I mean, they have Campbell and Freddie Anderson, who's just back, and that is not a real strength of that team. So, I always look to goaltending when I'm maybe this is my years of watching Marty Brodeur that I try to track who the hot goalie is, and often it is a guy who might not be a household name. You look at the Blues a couple of years ago. You look at the year Matt Murray won. Sometimes it's just the right guy in the right position. Maybe it could be Craig Anderson, who gets hot and just kind of runs with it. But it's not a strength for a team like the Maple Leafs. Whereas you look at the Knights, they obviously have great options. So that would favor someone like them.
And Tampa Bay with Vasilevsky.
Yeah, consistency there.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess we'll keep watching.
Are you going to make your cup pick? I went with the Canes. Let's hear yours.
I'm going to take Colorado. I know that's a little bit of the chalky pick, which I frequently am criticized for. But I don't know. I mean, they seem like pretty transparently the best team. I know that winning the President's Trophy is never viewed as a positive. But if you look at their stats, especially the underlying metrics, like I like to look at the possession numbers, whether it's things like Corsi, which is a share of shot attempts that your team has relative to the opponents, but also things like expected goals, scoring chances, high danger scoring chances. Colorado swept the league in those numbers at 5-on-5 this year. They were first in all of those possession numbers, in addition to obviously having a great goal differential and just talent-wise, you can kind of eyeball their roster and see how good they are. So to me, I mean, it just seems like a real dominating team that maybe we're not even giving enough credit to how great of a season they had, because I can't remember the last time a team just came in and just swept across all of those metrics as the best team. So maybe that's enough to break the President's Trophy curse. Who knows?
Yeah, especially considering they had some adversity too. I mean, they had COVID issues.
They played on a melting rink at Lake Tahoe at one point.
Yeah, so at full strength, they're an exciting team, and I think that it helps that St. Louis seems like a pretty easy matchup for the first round. So yeah, that gives them a leg up.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll keep watching. Right now, I think we can leave hockey in the rearview mirror. I think we'll be able to convince Sarah to talk about it more as the playoffs go on. It's just it'll be the irresistible momentum of how exciting these games are. She won't be able to resist it. So we'll wait for that for our next chance. But right now, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back to talk about the NBA.
First, a word from this week's sponsor, DraftKings. It's playoff time, and the stakes couldn't be higher. For you, that is. The players are going to be fine. But every day of basketball's playoffs, DraftKings will have $20,000 in total prizes up for grabs. Getting your shot at these daily cash prizes is completely free. DraftKings pools are easy to enter. Just download the DraftKings app, go to Pools, and choose from a wide variety of free contests for an opportunity to win cash prizes. All you have to do is answer a handful of questions around what you think is going to happen during that day's basketball games, and track your results throughout the evening. Questions will range from which team will hit the most threes to which team will score first. DraftKings is safe, secure, and reliable, so you can deposit and withdraw your money at your convenience. Download the top-rated DraftKings app now and use promo code HOTTAKE when you sign up to get your free shot at $20,000 in total prizes every day of the basketball playoffs. Head to DraftKings Pools page to get your shot at huge cash prizes. Again, that's promo code HOTTAKE, all one word, for a limited time, only at DraftKings. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for full details.
The NBA's play-in tournament starts tonight with the Charlotte Hornets squaring off against the Indiana Pacers and the Washington Wizards looking to sweep past the battered Boston Celtics. So now is the time for bold, sweeping takes on what's going to happen in the playoffs. And on ESPN's First Take, Max Kellerman was very emphatic about not only which team is going to win it all, but also who is going to be their MVP.
By the time the dust settles, James Harden will win Finals MVP this season. And I understand why people get this wrong, right? You look at the Warriors, KD is, Stephen A. said, the best player on that team, even better than Steph Curry. Won back-to-back championships on that team. He joined a 73-win team, right? And people look at this team, well, they're kind of like the Warriors again. Here comes KD. This team is more like the Rockets, Stephen A., because people like you who said D'Antoni's system doesn't win championships were wrong. D'Antoni, who's really coaching this team when Harden's on the floor. Harden and D'Antoni are running the Rockets' offense. D'Antoni's system resulted in a team that had no business competing with those Warriors, the 73-win Warriors that added KD, the team that you know LeBron and Kyrie and Kevin Love had no shot against. But they were hosting a Game 7. Without Chris Paul, missed 27 straight threes, still only lost by single digits. James Harden running D'Antoni's offense. Now give him KD and Kyrie and watch what happens. Don't have to. Already saw it this year. KD, with Kyrie, no Harden, they're a 500 team, give or take. Every permutation of players you want on that team, not that great until Harden's on the floor. With KD or with Kyrie or by himself. This man wins 4 games to every game he loses. He and D'Antoni are running that system with KD and Kyrie. Most important guy in that system is the point guard. That's James Harden. The answer is James Harden.
We are very happy to be joined by our friend and colleague Jared Dubin to talk about whether James Harden is indeed the answer for the Nets and a bunch of other questions about the NBA playoffs. Jared, how are you this morning?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Doing great. Excited to talk about some basketball with you. So let's just jump right in on what Max just said. What do you make of the Nets as the super team, the team that finally sort of proves that D'Antoni's offense can win a title? Do you think Kellerman has it right, or are there factors that might trip this team up along the path to the finals?
I'm going to cop out because I think he's both right and wrong.
Okay, that's allowed.
Every team in the NBA for years now has been running at least pieces of Mike D'Antoni's offense that he ran with Phoenix. Every team is using that spread pick and roll, those delayed drags and transition. That's all over the league. Every team is pushing the pace now. Teams play so much faster than they used to. So the idea that this team is going to be the one that finally wins Mike D'Antoni's offense a title, no. Like the last 6 or 7 teams that have won the title all ran at least pieces of Mike D'Antoni's offense. I think that this Nets offense, and I actually wrote about this for the site earlier in the year, it's not like the late D'Antoni era Rockets offense with James Harden. It's going back to like the early D'Antoni era Rockets with James Harden, where they're running way more pick and roll than isolation. And I think that that's where he's on with, if the Nets win the title, I do think Harden has a really good chance to be the guy that wins it for them, just because of the way their offense is run. He's at the controls for absolutely everything. So I think that makes sense. If they are going to win, it's going to be on the strength of their offense. He's the guy at the controls of it, so he's best suited to be the guy that sort of looks like he wins it for them and gets that Finals MVP.
I'm curious just because I'm away from the East Coast here in LA NBA land, which is obviously also exciting. But is anyone rooting for the Nets? It's really bad timing to have this Knicks resurgence come at the time when we have this super team. And I'm just curious. I know we talked about this on previous episodes, but it does feel like I can't imagine there's a lot of people around the league like who want to see this team succeed. Or am I completely
I don't know
wrong?
about people around the league. I actually live like 3 blocks from Barclays, and you see a decent amount of Nets gear outside. But even where I live, which again is like 3 blocks from Barclays, you see way more Knicks stuff. So there's probably a little bit of resentment within the league, but there is a fan base. Like I would tell my friends when the KD and Kyrie were considering choosing the Knicks or the Nets or any other team, I'd be like, you can't discount the possibility that they're going to the Nets, and they'd be like, what? Why? Why would you ever go to the Nets? And I'd be like, they have a real organization that...
Yeah, they're a real organization.
They're not owned by Jim Dolan?
Yeah, an actual basketball team, and it seems like they know what they're doing, and that's, exactly what happened. Obviously, the Knicks have turned things around a bit since then, but, there are reasons that those guys chose the Nets, and they've brought other guys along with them that are really good.
Well, one of my questions about the Nets also, especially if they start to kind of pick up steam in the playoffs, and this is something we've talked about, the value of having almost like a villain, in the narrative arc of the season. And it seems like this particular NBA season may, probably because of COVID and just the way it was such a compressed schedule starting on the heels of last year's really weird season, but it seems to have kind of lacked other options for that narrative arc that I'm kind of hopeful that in the playoffs, maybe it's what it takes is the Nets starting to kind of gel as that super team. And then you can kind of, we've said in the past that sports, they thrive with heroes, but they also thrive with villains, and they thrive with that team that everybody wants to see lose, but they're too good to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally right. And it's interesting too in the West because each one of the sort of top teams has, with the Clippers maybe being the exception. In some ways, I actually think the Clippers kind of have the most pressure on them because of what happened last year. But if you look at the Jazz with Mitchell missing all this time, the Suns being relatively, well, not even relatively, almost completely inexperienced when it comes to, the playoffs. Everything going on with the Lakers and the adversity they faced, normally they would pencil in nicely as a villain, but having to go through, and we'll talk about the play-in game in a second, having to go through this route to be the sort of favorite in the West. There's and then Denver, missing Murray. I mean, there are a lot of sort of flaws to the Western teams, and we don't have that dominant sort of superpower in the West, which is, I think, unusual, at least compared to the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I also think, the reason no real villain emerged throughout the regular season is, like, you look at, like, the top 10, 15 guys in the NBA, how many of them missed, like, extended stretches of time throughout the regular season? Jokic is the only one that played every game. LeBron was out, Anthony Davis was out, KD, Kyrie, and Harden were out. Giannis missed a few games here and there. Embiid missed time. Simmons missed time. Like, all of the guys on the best teams, you just mentioned Mitchell missed time. Mike Conley missed time. The Suns didn't really have anyone miss an extended period, but their strength, and I wrote about this earlier in the season too, is they've just had their top 7, 8 guys basically the entire year, and that's why they've been really good. Like, they've been the same version of the team that they'll be in the playoffs for most of the regular season. They had guys miss a couple games here and there, but not an extended stretch. And, like, what are you going to do? Hate Devin Booker and Chris Paul, who have, like, this is the first time they're playing together, and Booker's never been to the playoffs, and DeAndre Ayton became, like, a significantly better defender over the first 2 years of his career and is, like, a good story, and Mikal Bridges is unbelievable. Like, that's not a team you're going to hate. And it's like the opportunities for a team to emerge as a villain weren't there because guys weren't on the court enough. Like, if KD, Kyrie, and Harden had played 45 games together instead of 7, maybe people would be like, oh, I can't stand the Nets, I hate the Nets, but that just didn't happen.
Yeah, and this Lakers-Warriors matchup is kind of the first must-see NBA matchup in a while, I think, and should be great. despite LeBron sort of questioning why they should even have the play-in tournament at all, this is why we have it. We want to see, it's not good for him because his team might not make it out, but it's great for the rest of us to be able to see. So if that's the best play-in matchup, what's sort of the second best? What's the other one that you guys are watching, whether it's in the first stage or something that might be shaping up in sort of the back half, the Game 7, if you will, of the play-in tournament?
I think both potential Game 7s are the most interesting just because one of those teams going home,
Yeah, and I think it's going to be this is a kind of a cheap answer, but it's going to be the loser of this Lakers-Warriors game, and whether that's Memphis or Spurs, it doesn't matter, but I think you'll have the same interest. If it's the Lakers, obviously that's fascinating. I don't personally see a future where the Lakers lose 2 games, but
we might have to check in on Adam Silver if that does end up happening.
But seeing the Warriors playing for a spot in the playoffs, I think will be probably not the same as the Lakers, but it'll be just as much of a draw. But just the way Curry's been playing and the interest that he brings with this team that is obviously not the Warriors teams we've seen in the past, but still this Steph Curry, if not a better version of Steph Curry we've seen in the past.
I would say for the NBA league office, worst case scenario is like the Spurs beat the Grizzlies and the Lakers, and then the Pacers beat the Hornets and the Wizards. Like the Celtics are in, but there's no Jaylen Brown, and Russ and Beal are sitting at home. And then you got the Pacers with no Miles Turner, potentially no Malcolm Brogdon, and like LaMelo is sitting at home, and the Wizards are sitting at home, and LeBron is sitting at home. That would not be good, I don't think, from the eyes of the league office. I don't really see that necessarily happening. I would feel bad for the Grizzlies if they lose in the play-in for the second year in a row, by the way.
It's interesting because if they hadn't have tinkered with anything, they would still have Suns, Lakers, Warriors, Jazz, and in a league where we see very few upsets or, certainly top seed upsets in the first round, those have to be, 2 of the more dangerous 7 and 8 teams ever. I mean, certainly with the Lakers as a 7 seed, the most dangerous 7 seed ever. But I mean, I'm curious, Jared, what do you think? Let's say the Warriors do make it and face the Jazz. Do you give them a chance in that series? I mean, obviously the Jazz are a little bit they could be a team that just is built for the regular season. I'm curious how you think their success will translate to the playoffs.
So, first of all, I'm insulted because clearly the most dangerous number 8 seed ever is the 1998-99 New York Knicks. Shout out Latrell Sprewell, Allen Houston, Marcus Camby.
Oh, I was doing this century, but sure.
I mean, they went to the finals. Come on.
Yeah, no, I remember it well, but I'm thinking in a more recent lens of the NBA.
In my adult life, that's basically like all I have to hang on to as a Knicks fan until this year. So we're not going to forget about that team. But yeah, I mean, look.
Until this year.
The Warriors are like, I'm not going to count out Steph and Draymond, but I don't know what kind of answers they have for the Jazz offense just because there are so many different ways they can attack. Like, how many fires can Draymond put out all at once by himself is basically what that series comes down to on that side. That said, the Warriors are about as well set up to play against the Jazz's drop coverage, pick and roll defense as any team not named the Blazers. We've seen guys like Dame Lillard and Chris Paul and Paul George beat that kind of defense with, a pretty high level of consistency. And obviously Steph has the ability to do that too. But Rudy Gobert this year, I think, has been as good as he's ever been at coming out to the perimeter and contain on the perimeter or switch on the perimeter. And obviously having to play against Steph would be a pretty big test of that. So I wouldn't say they have no chance, but I wouldn't say, it's more likely that they don't advance out of the play and that they win 2 rounds.
Fair enough.
That makes sense.
So we have Jared on. We got to ask him about the Knicks. What are you thinking with the Hawks and beyond? Is there a beyond?
I'm thinking that it's house money.
That's what all the Knicks fans I know have been saying. I think they're just saying that.
They're just saying.
No, I mean, I could not have possibly imagined the season going like this. Like I'm more impressed with Julius Randle this season than I've been with any Knick player since since like I can remember. Like, you know, I was born in '87, so I saw, you know, the early '90s Knicks were, you know, my early childhood, and then the late '90s Knicks were like my early teenage years, and since then they've just been a disaster, obviously. So it was hard to be impressed with that many Knicks over the last 20 years or so, and he's just been obviously unbelievable. You know, I think they match up well with the Hawks. I think the Hawks probably have more talent. What do you do with your starting lineup then if you're starting DeAndre Hunter? Like Bogdan going to the bench, or is Herter going to the bench, or is, you know, Tony Snell or Solomon Hill or whoever the heck they're starting these days going to the bench? You know, the Knicks defense, I wouldn't say is an antidote for Trae Young. You know, they won that game late in the season, but Trae got hurt, and he actually, I think he had 14 assists in the third quarter when he went out, and he was kind of like toying with their rotations a little bit. So I think that, you know, there's a potential advantage to be exploited there. And I mean, if the Knicks are going to continue starting Elfrid Payton and getting outscored by 7-8 points in the first 6 minutes of every game, like, you're just putting yourself behind the 8 ball, and that's really what's been happening down the stretch of the season. Tibbs does not seem like he wants to change his rotation all that much, but, you know, if you want to start Alec Burks instead, or if you want to start Frank Ntilikina instead, so at least you have some better defense out there for those first few minutes. He doesn't seem to want to start Rose or Quickly and likes bringing them off the bench together. But, you know, I think it's a question of, you know, does the Hawks' greater level of offensive talent outweigh just the way the Knicks work so hard on defense? Because that's really what got them where they are. Obviously, over the second half of the year, they played much better offensively, and they've been shooting the lights out like crazy, which is absurd considering coming into the year, the number one biggest thing people said about them was like, how is this team going to hit like a single three all year? And they wound up, I think, third or fourth in the league in three-point shooting percentage. They don't take enough of them, but they shoot them really well, at least for most of the year. Like, I think it's the most interesting tactical matchup of the first round that we at least know of so far, just because of the ways that Tibbs' defense and that offense, led by obviously Trae Young and then Clint Capella rolling down the middle of the lane, just the way all that stuff interacts, and then how many different bodies can the Hawks throw at Julius Randle, and can anybody figure him out when nobody really did throughout the regular season?
Well, we'll keep an eye on that one, and just on the emotion level of you and all the other Knicks fans out there as we kind of make our way through this playoff. We'll have to see. Jeff, of course, you are a nominal Knicks fan.
Just keep saying house money. You know, think about the
100%.
future. It's too bad there's not like a real marquee free agent coming up, because I think that's probably where the conversation leads once the Knicks season ends, of who can we add to this? Maybe it's Lonzo, or I don't know. We'll start. I'm sure we'll devote that some time, because that always comes right at the end of this.
Yeah. As long as Tony doesn't jinx it again, I think it'll be okay.
Tony has done nothing but jinx every Knicks free agent season, off season, whatever you call it.
He's the reason.
Tony Chow in the control room. Shout out to him as our most diehard Knicks fan that I know, at least. But yeah, well, that's something to put later into the future. We'll know what the Knicks' ultimate fate is. But for now, they have potential, like you said, Jared, to potentially beat the Hawks, and then we'll see where that goes from there. And first and foremost, we got to watch out what happens in the play-in tournament. So I think we're going to leave things there, keep an eye on that tonight. But thank you, Jared, for coming on. Thanks for talking to us about all things basketball.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jared.
And we're going to take a break and then be back in a moment for our rabbit hole of the week. At 5:38, we often find ourselves falling down various rabbit holes of data. Some lead to stories. Most don't, frankly. We end each week's show with one of those descents, the hot takedown rabbit hole of the week. And this time, I'm going to call my own number because Sarah's not here. Actually, who am I kidding? I usually do the rabbit hole anyway.
Yeah,
I
always
live
you.
for this segment of the show.
Anyone who listens every week knows I'm the weak link when it comes to rabbit holes. So
Well, Jeff, I mean this is
who else is it going to be? It would have shocked the world if I produced
if
a
you
rabbit
had
hole.
produced it. Yes, but we want these rabbit holes from you. So this will be a little bit collaborative. You know, we can have an engaging conversation around this one because I know that this is a topic that you edited a story that I wrote about it, but it's about the San Francisco Giants dynasty of the 2010s and how it was super weird. So
make no mistake, it was a dynasty.
It was a dynasty.
They didn't win 2 in a row, but it was a dynasty.
Yeah, 3 and 5 years counts. They won those 3 in even-numbered years, which was weird. Also, the years that they didn't win, they didn't make the playoffs at all. One of those years, they didn't even finish 500. And really, the even-year magic kind of died out in 2016 when they lost the division series to the eventual champion Cubs. And so, you know, you might think, okay, well, they had this kind of unconventional dynastic run, but it's run its course. They're going to rebuild after this, and maybe the next version of the Giants that's competitive will be more conventional. But no, that's not true. They have rebuilt just as weird as they ran their dynasty in the first place. Right now, they are, well, as of yesterday, they were in first place in the NL West. They were a half game ahead of the San Diego Padres. So, nobody really saw this coming, especially since, you know, last year they weren't supposed to be competitive at all. Bruce Bochy retired as manager. Madison Bumgarner went to the Diamondbacks. And yet this team was right in the thick of the playoff race until the very end of the season. Only really when they had kind of a rough stretch at the worst possible time did they fall out of it. They lost the race for the 8th seed in the National League because that was a thing last year on a tiebreaker against the Brewers. So they weren't supposed to be in that place. And the big question going into this year was that a fluke? Like, what do we make of the fact that Mike Yastrzemski suddenly was an MVP? Do they have the pitching? You know, all of these questions about this team and whether, you know, they were actually just going to regress to the mean. And as it turns out, like I said, they have not done that yet. And they've really, the key to their success this year has been pitching, but specifically starting pitching, where according to wins above replacement, they have the best rotation of any team in baseball so far. There was a lot of talk, the Dodgers, they added Trevor Bauer. You know, the Mets obviously have an amazing rotation most years. The Yankees with Garrett Cole. The Brewers have been a rotation on the rise recently. The Phillies with Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola. Nope, the Giants, who are led by this immortal starting rotation that I'm sure all of us thought was going to be the best in baseball going into the season. Let's name off the Giants starters. So you've got Kevin Gausman, you've got Anthony DeSclafani, you've got Logan Webb, you've got Alex Wood, you've got Aaron Sanchez, and you've got I believe 35-year-old Johnny Cueto. I don't know about you, Jeff. I totally saw this on paper going into the season as being the best rotation in baseball, right?
Gausman and DeSclafani, I did not see, and I don't think anyone did. Alex Wood has been a pitcher who's looked dominant in the past.
He's had his moments.
In LA. His problem mainly was just staying healthy, and obviously let's see if he holds up because he has had, you know, injury problems in the past. It is a good place to pitch, and we've seen, you know, whether it's Lincecum back in the day or Bumgarner, we've seen pitchers thrive there. But
don't forget about Matt Cain.
Matt Cain, it's obviously a comfortable place to pitch, but this is like an island of misfits that's going on right now, and it's working.
Yeah, and we haven't seen something like this. Granted, we are only about a month and a half into the season, so this could definitely change. But if it does hold, we've never seen a team, at least in the expansion era, rise from number 23 in rotation value, which is where they were last year, to number 1 overall in rotation value from one season to the next. The biggest improvement was by the 1980 Phillies, who went from 21st in 1979 to first the year, and they actually won the World Series that year. But we haven't even seen that many teams rise from outside the top 20 to finish even second in rotation value. So it's been a pretty impressive turnaround. And the other thing about this rotation is that it's mostly built from just guys that they got from, almost the scrap heap, or at least guys that they got from outside the organization. 85% of the value by San Francisco pitchers this year have come from players who were not homegrown, which is the second highest rate of any team in baseball, behind only the Texas Rangers. And the Rangers, they kind of always seem to have pitching problems and have kind of gone through this this year. But for San Francisco, it is working out. And the other thing that I find interesting about this resurgent Giants team is that they're super old. Normally we think of with a team, no offense to us old guys, Jeff, but when we think about a team kind of rebuilding after they have a dynasty and they've kind of gone through their little rebuild period, we think of it as bringing in kind of younger talent, and they're reloading that way and kind of building from within. But the Giants are the oldest team in baseball right now. They're actually older on average. Their roster is older this year than it was the last time that they won the World Series. And a lot of it has been guys that were on that team, much older versions of that, having unexpectedly great seasons. And they just have these ancient guys, and they got much older between last year and this year, which is also sort of unprecedented. So their average age was second highest in baseball last year, behind only the Twins, and then it increased by 1.8 years between 2020 and 2021. So if you go back in all of baseball history and look at teams who had an average age of 31 or higher, there have been only 7 teams that also increased their average age by 1.8 or more years between seasons in that group. And a lot of the teams at the top of that list, like for instance the 1944 Washington Senators, increased their average age by 3.5 years between 1943 and 44. Well, it was also wartime, and the same went for the 1945 Phillies, the 1945 White Sox, the 1943 Dodgers. A lot of the teams in there were just trying to find guys that could play that weren't, serving in the military at that time. So really, in a modern sense, the only team that we could compare this Giants team to is the 1987 Yankees, who also increased their average age by 1.8 years and became very old. And that was at the end of that Yankee period. The 80s were famously, up until the 2010s, one of the rare decades in which the Yankees did not win a World Series, and it was kind of the end of that era of Steinbrenner really meddling and trying to bring in free agents and overhaul his team. So you kind of understand why that team got a lot older. But again, the Giants have gotten older, based on having a lot of veterans, and then also just going out and getting a lot of guys who maybe were not thought of super highly. And as a result, 82% of the value on this team has been generated by players age 30 or older, which is easily the highest in baseball this year. Nobody else is above 62%, and it's also on pace to be the 5th highest in baseball history in terms of the share of value created by players in their 30s or older. So I just think it's fascinating to see that this team, that when they were a dynasty, they did things in a very unconventional way. And then now their rebuild from that has also been extremely unconventional. We'll see if it holds up, but it's been great to see, like you said, Jeff, the some of the familiar names from that time playing well again, and then also some of the newer names also playing well. But they're not new to baseball because they're super old.
Yeah, well, I mean, even the guys who are new to baseball, you look at Yastrzemski is 30. And the guy's only been in the league. It's only his third year. It's only his third year in the league, and he's 30. So even their young players are old. I mean, Posey's an interesting story that he took the year off, and he just looks like a revelation. I mean, he looks like a different player. His power is back. I mean, this guy's got 8 home runs. And then they're getting these performance, from, I mean, I didn't realize that about their age, but you look at the lineup, and like Wilmer Flores is the young guy.
Yeah, right, at 29.
And Flores has been around for a while. But then they get like Darren Ruff is contributing a lot. I mean, that guy is like career utility player, and he's kind of doing it. They're doing it the old-fashioned Moneyball way. He just gets on base. It doesn't hit for high average or anything, but he gets a lot of walks, and it's kind of old school. It's fun to watch.
Yeah. So
old school again, in a new school sense of Moneyball, but
old school in the sense that they are old players. So
yes.
That's where that comes from. Now, again, we don't know if it will last. Right now, our model, which is notoriously slow to sort of adapt to trends that happen early in a season, it does not necessarily believe in the Giants, that they are serious championship contenders. It only gives them a 29% chance of making the playoffs. And again, it takes a long time to evolve. Just ask Sarah's Twins, who I did not think I would mention on this episode, but at 13-26 and looking absolutely horrible just in every possible way, they still rank 16th in baseball in ELO rating. So this takes a long time to update, and who knows, maybe we'll kind of look back at this episode and the Giants will have fallen apart and the Twins will have gotten hot. But for now, it's been great to see the Giants sort of emerge, especially in that division where they were not supposed to be leading it. I mean, it was all about the Dodgers and the Padres and that whole rivalry, and they've sort of inserted themselves into it.
Yeah, and I mean, the Dodgers are certainly banged up, and that is,
they're so banged up, they're signing Albert Pujols.
Yeah, I mean, Sager now with a broken hand, and Bellinger's been hurt all season. In the end, we're in August. I feel like the Dodgers are still going to be there on top. It's certainly an opportunity now for a team in the West to rack up some wins, which, they all add up.
Yeah, they all count. All right, well, that's going to do it for the Rabbit Hole, and that'll do it for this week's show. We will be back in your feed next Tuesday. If you did like what you heard, please subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps new people discover the show. And if you leave a particularly interesting review, we might shout you out on a future episode of the show. You can also email us at podcast@538.com. Let us know what you think. Our podcast producer, as always, is Sarah Shackett. Tony Chow is in the virtual control room, rooting for the New York Knicks as we speak. And our podcast commissioner is Chad Matlin. I think he's a Nets fan. We won't dive into that. For Jeff and Jared, I'm Neil. Thanks for listening, and talk to you next time.